licensed clinical psychologist and a licensed mental health counselor, and I have been using journaling as a therapeutic tool in my sessions for decades. I've personally been journaling since the age of 15. I've done some original research on journal writing, and also, I did my master's thesis on the topic of journal writing as well. So I believe that journal writing is one of the most powerful therapeutic tools available to therapists, but also to ourselves in terms of personal growth and self-discovery. So my goal for today is to, if people are already journaling, maybe to give them some new ideas about ways to use your journal differently. And if you're new to journaling, maybe get you excited about the idea of journaling and introduce you to a lot of different techniques that you can use to, grow, to discover yourself, or just for plain old amusement. So first, before I start, I wanted to read something from a book by Kathleen Adams. She is a very popular writer on the topic of journal writing, and this is called My 79-Cent Therapist. For nearly 30 years, I have had the same therapist. This therapist is available to me 24 hours a day and hasn't gone on vacation in almost 3 decades. I have called upon my therapist at 3 in the morning, on my wedding day, on my lunch break, on a cold and lonely Christmas, on a Bora Bora beach, and in my dentist's reception room. I can tell this therapist absolutely everything. My therapist listens silently to my most sinister darkness, my most bizarre fantasies, and my most cherished dreams. And I can say this in any way I want. I can scream, thrash, wail, rage, or celebrate. I can be funny, snide, accusatory, sarcastic, helpless, brilliant, opinionated, or vulgar. My therapist accepts all of this and more without comment, judgment, or reprisal. Best of all, this therapist keeps a detailed record of all of our work together, so that I have on my bookshelf a chronology of my life, my loves, my pains, my wins, my wounds, my growth, and my transformation. Has this cost you a fortune, you ask? Not at all. My therapist doesn't want payment. My therapist is my journal, which I write in spiral notebooks, obtainable for under $1 in any city in the country. That's why I call the journal my 79-cent therapist. I just really love that. Kathleen Adams is a great writer. I'll give you more information on her later, and I'll give some references. And she has some great books on journal writing. So before going into the techniques, I wanted to just go over a little bit of historical information on journal writing and diary keeping. You don't have to take any notes if I'm going to give a lot of different techniques. I'm going to send Val the slideshow after the presentation, so you'll have all of these things written down and all of the references. So the first diaries that were known to be used for purposes other than historical ones were the Japanese pillow diaries. Have people heard about those? In the 10th century, Japanese women would keep pillow diaries, and they would keep their feelings, write about their feelings and emotions, and literally keep them under their pillow. In Europe, in medieval Europe and England, diaries were associated with secrecy and magic. So we would see them kept for herbal recipes, cures. Sometimes people were accused of witchcraft by having their diaries full of explanations of herbs. Or we would see people thinking about ideas like how to construct machines and things, and those were kept in the Middle Ages and were kept secret a lot because it was dangerous to keep them at times. Then in the 17th century, diaries were common among England in Protestant gentlemen. And what they would do was use diaries to detail their lives and immoral transgressions, sort of a confession mechanism that we saw a lot in the 17th century. In America, the tradition of diary keeping came over on the Mayflower with the Puritans, and they used diaries for self-discipline and self-judgment, and also sort of as a confessional. Then we saw journaling with pioneer women who would chronicle their trips across the country and preserve culture and history in those diaries, a lot of recipes in those, which is a neat thing if you ever get a chance to read any. And then finally, in the US in the 1950s, diaries were mass marketed to young girls. Now, this was my first diary. Does anyone remember the little lock and key diaries that were marketed to American girls in the 50s? All right, just quick too, before we get into techniques, I wanted to tell you a little bit about some famous and infamous diaries, because I love reading famous diaries and not so famous diaries. Sometimes at yard sales, I've come across diaries, which is a really neat thing. Sometimes people are just getting rid of them in yard sales. But for famous and infamous, Anaïs Nin is probably one of the most famous diaries. She was born in 1903. Died in 1977, and she published 7 volumes of diaries. They were all published. And what she did, excuse me, she provided a model of using creative writing to solve her inner conflicts and explore her inner emotions. And her diaries show her moving through phases of internal conflict to finally fulfillment. Another famous one, of course, is Anne Frank's diary. Many of us have read that one, Diary of a Young Girl, and that depicts her life in hiding during World War II through her personal diary, which she called Kitty. Lewis Carroll was a famous diarist. Actually, the author, Lewis Carroll, he kept several diaries, and there's an interesting controversy about some missing diaries. So his diaries are missing between the age of 22 and 32. And some people have speculated that the pages were removed by his family because he proposed marriage to 11-year-old Alice Liddell, who was a friend of the family. And this 11-year-old is believed to be the inspiration for the Alice in Wonderland stories. My personal favorite, Samuel Pepys. Has anyone read the diaries of Samuel Pepys? Samuel Pepys is sort of, he's a regular guy who extensively journaled, and he never intended to be famous. He never intended his journals to be famous, but he kept a diary every day, and he just happened to live through some historical things like the Great Fire of London in the 1660s and the Great Plague. So his diaries are mostly about his life, but he's captured some amazing moments in history. But the neatest thing about it is he comes across sort of like a bumbling fool. He lights his wig on fire. He gets caught sleeping with a maid servant, a girl servant, and then he begins to hire only ugly servants to appease his wife. So it's really, really, really funny. I encourage you, if you like to read journals, that's quite a mix of humor, and he doesn't intend to be funny. He's just a funny person.
Would you spell his last name?
Yes, and it is Epys, and I always thought it was Pepys, but it's actually Pepys, Samuel Pepys.
Thanks.
Another one to read is Samuel, now the sort of American, what they call the American Pepys, is Samuel Sewall, and he was a judge during Puritan New England. He was one of the judges on the witch trials, and he has a similar approach in that you hear a lot about what he eats every day and his breakfast and his lunch, very, very detailed, but within there, you're really reading the history of the time around the witch trials as well. Then if you want to read about French Revolution through someone's diary, Elizabeth Wynne is a good one for that. She is writing, again, a personal diary, but happens to be during the time of the French Revolution. I'll give you, all of these will be in the slideshow, so if you don't want to write them down. George Templeton Strong, he's another diarist who's really describing in great detail what New York was like in the 1880s. I'm sorry, the early 1800s. And then also very popular, Virginia Woolf. Her diaries take place in around the 1920s. And she's a very popular and well-read diarist. All right, so enough about history. What about journals in therapy? Because that's really what I have focused on. But a little bit, again, about the history of therapies, journals in therapy. So Jung started using journal writing as a source of self-help and self-knowledge. Freud was also really liked journal writing, and he called diaries a little gem, or a clear and truthful view of the mental impulses. Mead suggested that diaries can help resolve Erickson's stage of identity versus role confusion by allowing the writer to try on different roles and see how they felt about them. Marion Milner was an English psychologist, turn of the century, and she wrote A Life of One's Own. And this is a good book also. It's in the reference section that I will give out to you. She described how, she was really the first one who described how to use a journal yourself for personal growth. And then any of us who were, you know, living in the 60s and 70s, remember Ira Progoff? Remember Ira Progoff? He developed the intensive journal method. And this was really big in the 70s. People would go to workshops and learn his technique. He had a binder with different sections in the binder, and he had a lot of techniques. So he was probably the first one to really expand the use of a journal for personal growth. And then finally, Kathleen Adams, probably the biggest journaling expert today. She has a master's degree in counseling. She does a lot of workshops. I've taken quite a few of them with her. And she writes a lot about journal writing and also has a website. So that would be something if you're interested to really check out. So the counseling literature is full of journal writing references and using them as an aid to counseling sessions and as a way to help people work through powerful emotions and help solve their problems. I give homework in journal writing quite frequently. I will send someone away with a journal assignment. I actually took to the habit of buying a bunch of journals at the dollar store and keeping a basket of different kind of journals in my office and letting people take them, because it's such a wonderful technique and it's such a great thing to play with. Now, a lot of people here are already keeping journals or already journal writing. Okay. I'm going to switch. I'm going to share my screen and go through some slides here. Hang on one second. Did that work? Let me see if this works. No, I can see me, but I can't see my screen. Did that not work, Val?
We can see your presentation.
Okay. Okay, great.
PowerPoint program right now.
All right, I'm just going to try to get it into a slideshow. Okay. Okay. So why keep a journal? List of things. Getting to know yourself, exploring parts of your personality, historical purposes, chronicling your life or what's going on in the world, and then being able to look back at that. Lots of people like to use it for healing wounds from the past, and I'll go into a lot of techniques following this about how to actually do that. Goal setting and achievement tracking is another popular thing. Discovering your writing talents. Most people that are aspiring writers are actually also keep journals of ideas and use journaling as a technique for writing. Healing difficult relationships. Tapping into your subconscious for answers to questions. Again, these are sort of reasons why, and then we'll go into the techniques after this. Exploring dreams. Dream journals are very popular. Developing your intuition. Exploring your creativity. And ever popular now is tracking and achieving health goals. Lots of people are using diaries for health goals. Starting new habits. Stopping unhealthy habits. Discovering roadblocks and barriers to your goals, organizing your life. That's becoming even more popular now, where there are techniques about how to organize your life, your home, and how to get things done through journaling. Treasuring moments, special moments in your life to be able to remember them, vacations, birth of children, things like that. So your journal can be a powerful tool to make life changes and accomplish goals, and use it to tap into your power to grow. All right, so people sometimes say, what are the rules for journal writing? Rule number one, there are no rules. Have you ever heard the thing, don't should yourself? Make sure you're not using shoulds, like it has to be neat, it has to be organized, I have to do it every day, I have to keep it super secret. But also make sure not to use should nots, such as It's not okay to say bad things about other people. It's not okay to be negative in your journal. Actually, if you ever read, and I read a lot of people's journals and a lot of my clients, and they're often way exaggerated in negativity, because that's a lot of times how people use a journal to vent. And so another concern about taking care of your journals, if anyone were ever to read them, people sometimes get a much more negative view of how you're feeling about them if they read a journal entry, because they tend to be exaggerated. But that's okay. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. The only rule I would suggest is making sure that you can preserve your journal for the future, should you want to read it. So using acid-free paper that won't deteriorate over time, I think, is key, because you really, really may want to read this in the future. A couple of things on choosing the right book. You know, I've used every type of book possible. Some people like spiral bound books because they can rip out pages that they later really don't want in there, and that's an advantage to a binder or a spiral bound. Other people like the sewed manuscript type books because they want to resist the urge to rip out pages easily. Sometimes I have prematurely ripped out a page that later I wish I had left in. Privacy and security are pretty important. You have to decide how important it is to you to keep your diary private. Now, my daughter will leave hers everywhere, and she has deeply private things written in there, and she sort of has maybe too much trust. So I've been trying to counsel her to use a little more discretion, since her boyfriend recently found and read her entire diary. You know, but people have a range of needs for privacy. People sometimes use lock boxes if they're very concerned for privacy. But make sure you feel it's safe, because otherwise there's nothing worse than somebody intruding on your privacy when you don't want that. Now, someone had mentioned earlier plans for the future of the book, and this is, or the books or volumes, this is really important. A lot of times people are writing journals, and we sort of write them almost as if we're talking to someone else, but a lot of times we don't really formulate who we're talking to. So are you going to be talking to people in your future? Are you going to be talking to your future self? It's important to make plans for the future of the book. So I have a friend, she and I both keep a lot of journals, and we have an agreement. We have our journals in a box, and we have it taped up, and we have each other's name on the box. So if anything happens to either one of us, the other one gets that box, and we are going to decide what to release and what not to release to our family. So that was our way of dealing with it. And you can think of whatever makes sense for you. You can duct tape the box up tight and put instructions on it, throw it in the fire, or open it up and read my inner thoughts and feelings. So really just deciding for yourself how you want that to be handled. But it's a very important thing to think about. All right, so one more word on digital journaling, because nowadays, so when I started doing my research and my work with journaling, there was no such thing as being able to do your computerized journals or apps. And now there are apps for journaling, there are programs for journaling. People just journal on their personal computer. But I would, make sure you back up your work. I would suggest printing your work, because I had done some of this on floppy disks, and it's not easy to access anymore. So as technology changes, you want it to be easy for you to reread your journal, should you want to reread them. And be careful about locking into a journaling app or program too quickly, because I have also done this, where I started using one and then discovered a month or two in that, I don't really like this. And if you have a bunch of half-used apps and things, that can be a problem too. So print it out, and that's the solution to that. Blogging is sort of a form of journal writing, right? We're publicly journal writing in essence, and allowing other people to read it and to comment and to interact with our blog. And so in essence, that's a form of journal writing. And if that's the one that you choose, I would just caution you to make sure you're not too sensitive of a person, because people can say really mean things on public blogs to your deepest, innermost feelings. So if you choose to blog or put your works out there in public. Just, make sure that you got a tough skin about it, because that's a pretty common thing that happens. Okay, so now I'm just going to start showing you a bunch of different ideas or ways to journal. And I would suggest you try a bunch of these, because they're very different and they bring out different feelings, and some will flow better than others for you. So freestyle journaling is just what it sounds like. Just start writing, and you just capture what you did that day or what you're thinking about. There's no real form to this. It's just a free-flowing, open the book and start writing. There's also what's called journaling with prompts. And prompts are ways to get you thinking or get you going. And there's lots of sources for prompts. These are some of them. And there are lots of them. I'm going to show you some of them. But Crystal Norton has 101 prompts. Kathleen Adams has 22 different techniques. And Joan Neubauer has a lot of techniques as well as prompts. And you can even just Google journaling prompts and you'll get tons and tons of these. So what do these look like? These are some prompts for personal growth. So so you would just take one of these prompts and start writing. What are your core values? What are 5 things you can do to become a better person? What have you always been curious about? If you could change one thing about your life, what would it be? So you would start with that prompt at the beginning of the page and just write. This is one of my favorites, journaling with letters, or using a letter as a prompt. So writing letters to yourself or others. I did this. I just recently was looking back at some old journals and found a letter that I wrote at age 30 to my 40-year-old self. And it was really great to reread, because it was saying, Donna, I hope that you have children by now. I hope that you finish school. And it was really cool. And I knew my dog was going to die. So I was like, I hope you have another dog. And it was just so cool to read that, 30-year-old writing to the 40-year-old. And I keep meaning to do it again. Now I've got to write to my 60-year-old self. But that's a really cool thing that you can do. Also backward, writing a letter to your younger self. So what would you have liked to know to prepare you for the future that you're in now? That's a great exercise. Writing a letter to people you're angry at. This is very helpful, very cathartic. Do not send these letters because sometimes people make the mistake of sending these, and that's usually a very bad idea. But it really, really can help to write an angry letter. Writing your obituary as if you died yesterday. This is a great exercise, because you really have to boil down what would you want to be said about you. And you have to sort of come to really think about the important things that you would want said about you. Did someone say something? That I heard. I've tried most of these. Writing a letter to someone important to you that's passed away. Writing a letter thanking someone for something. Now, these I think are fine to send. And I just attended a workshop on happiness recently, and one of the techniques that they described on increasing happiness is gratitude, and writing gratitude letters and personally delivering gratitude letters was associated with an increase in personal happiness. I haven't tried this one, but it seems interesting. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll write a letter to Samuel Pepys, telling him how much I love his diary. So writing a letter to a historical figure that you wish you had known. And again, about gratitude journaling. People have heard about this, right? This is becoming very popular now. Gratitude lists and gratitude journals. If you start a journal, some people do this on Facebook, 3 things I'm grateful about, writing them down, 3 things in the morning, 3 things at night. If you do this every day, you will find that your mood improves. And there's some really interesting research going on now with 3 different things, with keeping a gratitude journal, doing volunteer work, and exercising. So those 3 things, if you're keeping a daily gratitude journal, doing a little bit of exercise, not vigorous, a little bit of exercise, and and doing volunteer work at least once a week, that package together is actually rivaling some of the antidepressants with working with depression. So that's a powerful, powerful trifecta of good stuff. And we'll see where that research goes. And it's not going to replace antidepressant medication, but it sure is showing some positive effects with people with depression. So gratitude journaling, I encourage you, if you don't already do this one for sure. Just writing down 3 things a day, even if you're just grateful. I'm just grateful for my glass of water. If I can't think of anything else, start small, and you'll find that this technique really does help you feel good and improve your mood. Incomplete sentences. You can come up with these yourself, or you can get them online. Or in the books. There's lots and lots of them. And this is nice. Like if you take one of these, say you sit down to do your journaling, and you just take one of these prompts and start going with it. Like something as simple as life is, and then just start going with it. And you'll be surprised at where you end up sometimes with some of these prompts. And you can take the same prompt and do it a different day and get an entirely different something out of it. So it's not like you use the prompt and you can't use it again. In fact, if you use the same one a lot, you might even find some interesting results there. Hopes, dreams, and goals prompts. I picked these from the Crystal's book, but these are fun. Very common question we ask people in therapy: what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Some of these are common kind of therapy questions, but people are writing themselves are sometimes much more expansive. And you can make up your own. Life's moments prompts, and this is just taking one moment and really blowing it up and expanding it in your journal entry and focusing on it in great detail. A lot of people use these for childhood memories. A lot of people complain that they don't remember much about their childhood, and so you can use these types of prompts to try to access some memories. There's a great book. I'm going to hold it up. I really like this book called A Journey Through Your Childhood by Christopher Whipple. The reference will be in the end of the reference section of this talk, but this book takes you through your childhood and helps you use free association, but it actually guides you to remember a lot of things. It goes section by section, like draw a map of your home or homes, your childhood homes, your toys. It goes section by section to help you recover some of those memories if you're choosing to or wanting to. These are some fun ones. You know, what are you proud of? What would you do for a do-over? That's kind of a nice one. But you can imagine, you can make these up yourself. There's lots of great ones. Being you prompts, song lyrics. I really like this, especially with teenage clients. So bring in some song lyrics that you feel are meaningful to you, and let's talk about them. And then on their own, they can do more expanding on them, writing them, maybe making a similar song about something that they're trying to work on. Fears, looking at your fears. Journaling's a great place to do that. What holds you back? Another great use of a journal. What is holding you back? What is making you feel vulnerable? There's some more ideas. Sometimes people are hesitant to talk about what they're proud of to someone else. I find, say, in therapy, for instance, people, even a good example, Val, earlier on, we were complimenting you on how good you are with technology, and people are sometimes hesitant to grab hold of that pride and express it and experience it and really feel it. And so people in a journal can sometimes feel more safe to kind of be proud of themselves. Another technique for journaling is character depictions, describing people. I recently started doing some of this because my children have not met a lot of my important relatives. So I've tried to start to just like make incredibly detailed descriptions of everything I can remember and putting them in a journal, because they've never met them. And as the generations go on, we lose details. So trying to capture details of important people in your life. Describe someone you're angry at. Describing the positives and the negatives of that person can really help you deal with difficult relationships, because sometimes we think people are all negative, but when we really start having to make a list of positives about someone we're angry at, that can help us expand and work through some of those emotions. I like this one too. Describe someone you want to come into your life. So this is sort of like a future-oriented technique. Who do you want? What partner do you want to come into your life? Or what child or what job? Sort of inviting someone in from the future and just kind of free associating and thinking what that would be like. Okay, another popular technique for journaling is dialoguing. Now, people are probably familiar with this because the Gestalt therapists did a lot of work with dialoguing, or these sort of empty chair techniques are basically dialogues. So Ira Progoff came up with dialoguing in the journal. He was the first one to talk about using that particular technique from Gestalt therapy in journaling. And then Kathleen Adams adds on to his with some more dialogue type techniques. So you can have dialogues in your journal with people, places. It seems kind of weird to people, but you can have dialogues with parts of your body. I'm going to take from one of Kathleen Adams' books, just show you what an example of what dialoguing sounds like in a journal. I marked a page here with a couple that explain it. So she has one example of a woman who has husband and wife are going through a very painful divorce, and she was trying to work through some anger about that. So within this little dialogue in Kathleen Adams' example, you can see where she works through something. So she says, it's just like every other situation in our marriage. You always get your way. You always get to call the shots. Well, what about me? What about my needs? So she's talking to the husband in the journal, and then she has him talk back to her, and she says as him, well, you never let me know you had any needs. How can you fault me? You acted like your whole life revolved around taking care of me. You sacrificed too much of yourself for me. Then she dialogues back as herself. Again, this is all herself though. I won't make that mistake again. I'm going to take care of myself, by God, and pity the man who tries to come between me and myself. And then she has him say, good for you. It's time you realize you're worth more than I was able to give you. So see how she's not even talking to him, but she is using her diary to dialogue back and forth and get to kind of a place that feels better to her. Then Kathleen gives another example of dialoguing to a body part. And again, the reason I'm giving examples, this can sound kind of weird, but it's pretty helpful. So this person is dialoguing to her tailbone, which is hurting her. And she says, hey, tailbone, what's going on? Tailbone says, get off your butt. What? You're not going to get anything done as long as you sit around waiting for someone to rescue you. Now that's interesting, right? So this is all kind of coming from her. And the tailbone says, and your life would quit being such a pain in the ass if you just do something. So in a very quick little dialogue with a body part, she's able to hear herself saying some things to herself that are worthy of exploring. So see how that works? It's kind of interesting. It sounds a little weird, but it's a really great technique to try. Another one is stream of consciousness writing. This is just sitting, this works really well, especially I think in the morning. 5 minutes upon waking, write. Now, in my undergraduate program, one of my teachers, his name was Seymour Epstein, he is a pretty famous personality theorist. And I was young, and he made us do this. He insisted on, this was a big part of our grade, he insisted that we do this. And I was really angry at first because I didn't want to do it. But he made us turn it in. So for 5 minutes every waking morning for 2 weeks, we had to write. And I was sometimes just writing, this is so stupid. I can't believe we have to do this. But at the end of the 2 weeks, he had us look back in our writing and look for themes that came up. other than my whining and complaining, there were actually a lot of things in there that were basically what he would call life schemas. So I could see within my 5 minutes of rumblings every morning some pretty important themes about the way I looked at the world. And then we started to look at ways to change those. So that's a powerful thing. And if you have that time in the morning and you decide to do that, you might find some really interesting things about your personality that surprise you. Another teacher of mine had a technique, dream journals. A lot of people wake up and write down their dreams, and then they look for themes in those, and that's neat. But another teacher of mine in my graduate program, his name was Joel Ziff, and he had us take our dream, write our dream, and then take each thing in the dream and speak as if you were that character. So, and again, it seemed silly to me at first, but I remember I had this dream about, I was just finishing my master's program. I was in the thick of writing a thesis. It was very stressful. I remember having a dream of being at the bottom of a hill and throwing balls up the hill. And then they kept rolling back down, throwing them up, rolling back down. And so I remember doing that dream in particular, but I had to speak as myself throwing the balls up the hill. Then I had to speak and I had to speak from the voice of the hill, kind of, and the ball. So it was really interesting. And if you get a chance to do that, to take a dream, if you remember one, write the entire dream out, and then speak from each character. That was fascinating too, how that got to the meat of the issue of just the stress of finishing up school. It was a fun thing to do. One of my favorite ways of journaling is lists. I'm a list keeper anyway, but lots of people just do list after list as a journal technique. So 100 things lists are great because the first 20 are usually easy. So 100 things I want to accomplish, or 100 obstacles that are in my way. The first 20 are easy, but then you have to really stretch yourself, and the end ones are usually more fascinating and useful. Bucket lists, people are familiar with those nowadays since the movie Bucket List. Those are fun. Cost-benefit analyses, if you're not familiar with these, this is it's sort of a cognitive behavioral technique as well as a REBT therapy technique. When faced with any important decision, dilemma, writing a list of the pros and cons, basically. So say I want to decide if I'm going to quit smoking. What are the pros of that? What are the cons of that? And just looking at it, just looking at the pros and cons in list form. Is anybody familiar with alpha poems? This is a fascinating technique. I really love this. And this is another one. If I had to suggest that you do any two things out of this talk, if you go home and do them, I would say the gratitude lists and alpha poems. So alpha poems is a journaling technique. I'm not sure who invented it. I think Kathleen Adams might have been one of the early users of this technique. But what you do is you write the entire alphabet down the left side of a piece of paper. So you write the A, B, C, D. And then you pick anything you want, or just see what comes up, or you pick something that you want to talk about. I have one in front of me that is a client of mine. And so this is how it goes. So you take the A and you just write a sentence. So hers is angry. That's what I am. B, because of this cancer. C, cancer. D, damn cancer. E, erase it, please. See how it goes? You just go down, 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 and you come up with a sentence that starts with the letter. And these really end up being quite beautiful and pretty profound. It's a neat technique. I'd suggest everybody try that one at home. And then it changes all the time, because whatever topic you're doing, you can write some really, really beautiful, beautiful poems that way. Theme journals. So if you're planning a career change, wedding, or I love envisioning, I have a lot of clients retiring. So I have them working on journals envisioning their retirement. So they're not only writing in there about ideas about what that's going to look like, and maybe a list of things that they're going to do, maybe cut out photos of places they might like to live, maybe bucket lists. You know, you can have all kinds of different things in here. But if you're planning a change or change of career, having a journal that you can put all that stuff into related to that change, and all your free-flowing thinking and idea dumps, I like to call them. Just sit and dump ideas into the book and then come back later and look at them. Historical journals. You know, if you're times that you want to remember something, I did this when I was pregnant with my first child. I started a diary for her the day I found out I was pregnant. And I wrote in there every day. Now she's 20, and I'm not writing in there every day, but I am writing in there once a month. So for 20 years, I've had this book for her that's been like a secret book. She doesn't know I have it. When they inked her little foot in the delivery room, I stamped it in the book, and I keep pictures in there, and I have all what she was doing and her friends and her teachers and all of these things. And it's still secret. And I also did it for my second daughter, who's 17. And I'm not sure when I'm going to disclose to them that I've done this. I'm thinking maybe when they can really appreciate it, like when they're pregnant with their first child or something. But I think they'll be really surprised and this will be great, because can you imagine looking back and being able to see all these things that a lot of them they probably have forgotten. But that's a historical journal, basically. And so, and then my older daughter just got interested herself, and she's an avid diarist, and she will be so blown away, surprised to know that I've secretly kept this for 20 years for her. Healing journals. A lot of people use journals for chronic illness or pain. And there's some studies on this, that this is very helpful. It doesn't magically cure something, but people do seem to show a reduction in symptoms if they are journaling about their pain. And using some of the journaling techniques specifically for pain can help a lot. And also, if you really do journal about what's going on with you and an illness, it's great to have your doctors, you be able to look back and see information that can be very helpful to doctors. This is a really neat idea, and I wish I knew about this when I started my journals for my kids, because I think I might have done this instead. So I have a book for each of them, but this idea for Joan Nuerbaum says the family journal. So what she does is she takes a big book and has all different family members contribute to it. And so even pets, she puts the paw prints in there. She has all the family members, big, thick spiral notebook, write year after year, including drawings and clippings and photos. And everybody writes in the book about vacations. And I think this is just the greatest idea. Grandparents could use this too, just looking back and different ideas when the grandchildren come over. Now, art journaling. Soul collage. Is anybody familiar with this? This is kind of new. This is pretty neat. Sina Frost, she has a website, and she teaches people to tell their story using images and collage form. It's not that different than the collage we all learned as kids, you know, putting pictures together that represent ourselves, but it's really more of a sort of self-discovery collaging. And on her website, she has videos on how to do that. Doodles, drawings of any kind, self-portraits, cartooning. I've done some of this too. If you have an issue that you're struggling with, sort of doing a cartoon with alternate endings. I do that a lot with teenage clients. They really seem to like that one. Shields, representations of yourself and your family. And people are probably familiar with The Artist's Way. That's been around for decades, but that is a great book by Julia Cameron, which is a guide to open up creative pathways, helping artists with artist blocks and discovering the artist in you. So those are some ideas. I'm going to take my screen off here so people can talk a little bit. We have references here. and some websites. So I'm going to send this to Val as soon as we're done. And if anybody would like all these slides, I will send it. So, anybody have any questions or thoughts or